Blackwood Manor. A name whispered with fear, shrouded in mist. It stood on a hill overlooking the town, a constant reminder of tragedy and mystery. The old manor, a monument to darkness, its windows empty eyes, staring blankly into the soul. It had seen things, terrible things. The townsfolk avoided it. Their whispers told stories of the family that perished within its walls. Their souls, they said, trapped forever. The house remained empty for years, until now. Daniel Blackwood, a man of mystery and intrigue, with a rugged look that spoke of countless untold stories. He stood at the iron gates of an old mansion, a place that had been whispered about in hushed tones for generations. He was a distant relative, the unexpected heir to the estate. The old will, yellowed with age, had named him the new owner. He examined the legal documents in a dimly lit room, the weight of his newfound responsibility pressing down on him. Daniel knew the stories that surrounded the mansion, tales of ghosts and hauntings, of eerie occurrences that defied explanation. He dismissed them as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations and superstitions. He was a man of logic and reason, a firm believer in the tangible and the explainable. The supernatural held no sway over him. He spent hours in the library, surrounded by books, deep in thought, trying to piece together the history of his new home. With a determined stride, he stepped inside the mansion. The air was thick with dust, particles dancing in the beams of sunlight that managed to penetrate the gloom. The scent of decay was pervasive, a reminder of the years the house had stood abandoned. A shiver ran down his spine, an involuntary reaction to the cold and the decay. He tried to shake off the feeling of unease, attributing it to the chill in the air and the unfamiliar surroundings. He rubbed his arms, trying to ward off the cold, and shrugged off the eerie feeling that seemed to cling to him. He was determined not to let the stories affect him. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt almost oppressive. The only sound was the echo of his own footsteps on the wooden floors, a stark reminder of the emptiness that surrounded him. The echoes seemed to follow him, bouncing off the walls and creating an eerie symphony of sound. He walked on, each step a testament to his resolve. Determined to make the mansion his own, he reached the grand staircase. It was a magnificent structure, a testament to the craftsmanship of a bygone era. The dark wood of the staircase was polished smooth by time, each step worn by the countless feet that had trodden upon it over the years. He placed his hand on the railing, feeling the smoothness of the wood beneath his fingers. A sudden chill shot through him, as if the wood itself was alive with some unseen energy. He pulled back his hand quickly, as if burned. The sensation was unexpected, a stark contrast to the logical explanations he clung to. He stood there for a moment, staring at the railing, trying to make sense of what he had just felt. The mansion, it seemed, had secrets of its own, waiting to be uncovered. The first night, the silence was deafening, broken only by the creaking of the old house. Daniel lay awake. In the darkness, he heard a noise, a soft whisper, coming from the hallway. He dismissed it as his imagination. He tried to sleep, but the silence was unnerving. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. He got out of bed, walked to the window, looked out at the town below, the street lights casting an orange glow on the empty streets. He felt a presence behind him. He turned around. Nothing. The silence was deafening, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your heart race. He strained his ears, hoping to catch any sound, any indication that he wasn't alone. Just the shadows, dancing in the moonlight. They seemed almost alive, moving with a rhythm that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him, waiting for the right moment. He told himself it was his nerves. The stress of the past few weeks was getting to him. He had been working late nights, barely sleeping, and now his mind was playing tricks on him. He went back to bed, tried to ignore the feeling, but it was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains seemed amplified in the stillness of the night, of being watched. But the whispers started again, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but growing louder, more insistent, softer this time, but closer, as if they were right next to him, breathing down his neck. He shivered, pulling the covers tighter around him. His name, he could have sworn. It was unmistakable. A voice he didn't recognize but felt eerily familiar. It sent chills down his spine. He heard his name, whispered on the wind. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it, a hint of malice that made his blood run cold. He sat up, his heart pounding. The room seemed to close in on him, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. He felt trapped, like a caged animal. He listened. The whispers grew louder. They were all around him, coming from every direction, yet he couldn't pinpoint their source. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was maddening, the way the sound seemed to envelop him, suffocating him, and nowhere at the same time. He felt a sense of dread, a foreboding that something terrible was about to happen. He couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all too much. He had to do something, anything, to make it stop. He got out of bed and followed the sound. His footsteps were hesitant, each one echoing in the silence, but he had to know. He had to find out what was causing the whispers down the hallway, into the darkness. The shadows seemed to close in around him, the whispers growing louder with each step. He felt a chill run down his spine, but he pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Section 5. A cold embrace. The whispers led him to the end of the hallway, to a door he didn't recognize. It was slightly ajar and a cold light emanated from within. He reached for the handle, his hand trembling. He pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the cold intensified. He stepped inside. The air grew heavy, hard to breathe. He felt a presence behind him, close, too close. He turned around and screamed. A pair of icy hands gripped his shoulders. He was pulled into an embrace so cold it burned. Section 6. The face in the mirror. He blacked out. When he woke up, he was lying on the floor of the room. The door was gone, but the cold remained. He tried to stand. His legs felt weak. He looked around for an escape, but there was none. He saw a mirror on the wall. He crawled towards it. His reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. His reflection was changing, his face aging, withering, becoming skeletal, his eyes turning black, lifeless. He screamed and punched the mirror. His fist passed right through. The reflection remained, mocking him. He was trapped in this room with this thing that looked like him but wasn't him. He banged on the walls, screamed for help, but no one could hear him. He was alone with his fear and the reflection. The reflection spoke, its voice a rasping whisper. "You are mine now," it said. "This house is mine, and now so are you." Days turned into nights. Daniel lost track of time. He was weak, exhausted, broken. He had given up. Hope had abandoned him. He was going to die in this room, alone. He looked at the reflection. It seemed pleased with his despair. It fed on it. He could feel it draining him of his life force. He closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable. But then he heard a sound, a faint scratching, coming from the wall, behind the mirror. He opened his eyes, looked at the mirror. The reflection was gone, replaced by a growing crack in the wall. The scratching grew louder, the crack widened, and then he saw it, a hand, reaching out from the other side. He didn't hesitate. He reached out, grabbed the hand, pulled with all his might. The wall crumbled. He fell through. He found himself standing alone, surrounded by the dense, dark forest. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. He felt a chill run down his spine. Outside, in the grounds of Blackwood Manor, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the overgrown grass. The manor stood tall, its windows like dark, empty eyes watching him. The sunlight began to break through the trees, casting a warm glow on his face. He had escaped the clutches of the night. He was free, or so he thought. He turned to look back at the house, the place that had held him captive in its sinister embrace. The memories of the horrors he had faced there were still fresh in his mind. He wanted to see who or what had saved him. But to his astonishment, the house was gone, vanished without a trace. In its place, an empty field stretched out before him, bathed in the soft light of dawn. It was as if the house had never been there at all. Relief washed over him. He was safe. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed, but deep down he knew the truth. The real haunting was not the house itself. Blackwood Manor had never been the real source of terror. It was merely a reflection of something far more sinister. The thing that looked like him, that mimicked his every move, his every thought. That was the real terror, the dark, shadowy figure that lurked in the corners of his mind. And it was still out there, somewhere, waiting, watching, biding its time until it could strike again. The real haunting was not over. It had only just begun.